Hello, friends. I'm Jonathan Lehman. Welcome to Journal Talk, in which we take the most recent 9 Marks journal and talk about an article in it. And the most recent journal is Pastoring Through Political Turmoil. And the article is called Don't Get Left Behind: Why Pastors Should Consider Preaching Through Revelation in Our Cultural Moment. And Sam Emadi is the author of that long titled, creatively titled article. And Sam is the senior editor with me here at 9 Marks. And he's a member of Third Avenue Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. Good article, Sam.
Thanks, brother. It's also a long article.
not,
Long
not
title,
long,
long article.
not as long as mine. This was one of my favorite articles in the journal, hands down. Excellent.
Thanks, brother.
Is your point, as I understand it, basically that the COVID-19 pandemic is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy and that the locusts of Revelations 9 are kind of Apache helicopters?
The third horse, baby. That's what I'm saying.
What is your point?
My point is that evangelicals often ignore the book of Revelation because we find it a little intimidating, a little frightening, and maybe we've seen it abused.
Evangelicals recently.
And again, recently because maybe in the previous generation we saw it abused a little too frequently. Seeing preachers who preach with, Revelation in one hand and the newspaper in the other, and making some fantastic, fanciful claims about how to interpret Revelation. I'm not suggesting that, but what I am saying is that Revelation is useful for helping us think through our cultural moment and especially all the cultural tumult that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, I'm going to read a paragraph, this excellent paragraph. At the same time, modern evangelicals can learn something from previous generations' preoccupation with apocalyptic literature. After all, God gave us Revelation to challenge our temporally obsessed, earthly perspective of the world. It lifts our eyes beyond political powers, pandemics, elections, and economic crises to spiritual realities, principalities, powers, and the Christ who rules over heaven and earth. It confronts our preoccupation with the immediate and reminds us that the most important and defining features of the world are unseen. By diagnosing our primary problem as outside this realm, Revelation also reminds us that our ultimate hope lies in someone who can overcome the spiritual powers that lie behind this world's brokenness and corruption. In times of political and cultural turmoil, we need revelation. Love that.
Thanks, brother.
It's just spot on because we are obsessed with what we can see, and I mean, what's on Twitter and who's shouting at who right now, and
well, it's so easy to get dragged down into viewing the world only with the eyes of the flesh, and assuming that what's truly true and really real are the things that are in front of us, right? The real powers at play are the political entities that we see on, in the media. That the real power in the world are the economic institutions that are the movers and shakers.
Yeah.
But the biblical worldview is quite different, right? In the biblical worldview, we see principalities and powers at work. We see forces of darkness deceiving and holding people captive. And then, of course, we know that the Lord Jesus is reigning from heaven, and that we're not fighting against principalities and powers. That there's something else that's truly true and really real behind the physical things that we encounter every day.
Well, your first point of things to do then is embrace Revelation's supernatural perspective on reality, which is right where we want to begin. Do you remember? Did you ever read that Frank Peretti novel, something, "The Hour of Darkness"?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Darkness?
I've not read it.
In which it's like you're looking at reality, and it really is kind of like behind the curtain are these spiritual forces. Is that basically a correct assessment as you understand it?
I mean, having not read the book, I don't know how to assess the book, but your description is exactly what I'm suggesting in the article. So I think, again, we don't need to look with the eyes of the flesh. We need to look with the eyes of faith. We need to let the Bible be the grid through which we interpret the world. And as we, we've all kind of experienced the tumult of 2020, and it's easy to feel like, man, this year has felt apocalyptic. And what I'm suggesting in the article is that Yes, it is apocalyptic. And that's because every year is kind of apocalyptic. I think what John is doing in Revelation is he's laying out symbols that help us interpret the world that we live in. So he talks, in Revelation 6, when he talks about these four horsemen that are dispatched by the Lord Jesus to execute judgment on the earth, these provisional judgments that are supposed to remind us of the judgment to come. Well, what did these horsemen do? They create military conquest, they create war, they create famine, they create pestilence. And these are all things that we have seen and experienced in 2020. And it's not that those horsemen refer to a specific thing that happens in world history. It's the fact that these things happen in every age, in every culture, in every time. So we're supposed to see this tumult in light of the fact that the Lord Jesus is the one who is sending these things as provisional judgments against sin. And he's calling the saints to remember that he is the one reigning in heaven. And at the same time, he's telling unbelievers that there's a greater judgment to come and that he has the authority of judgment and he can execute it.
Okay, so I'm watching Twitter, I'm watching Facebook, I'm watching the news. We're getting closer to November 3rd, these elections. I'm hearing this side, demonize that side demonize the first side, back and forth. I'm feeling anxiety over who's going to win. I'm thinking about, well, if he wins, and these things are going to happen. If those are going to happen. How is reading the Four Horsemen, or any number of other, dragon, beast? How is that helping me encounter the news?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a number of responses I could give to that. I think the main thing,
I'm just looking for one.
I think the main thing that Revelation wants to teach us, the core of the book,
Uh-huh.
is Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5. It's the picture of the exalted Christ reigning in heaven, who has world history in his hands. He alone has the authority to open the scrolls. He alone has the authority to unravel world history according to his will. And all of these things are in his hands, right? So a pandemic doesn't come to the world unless Jesus wills it. So we know that these things aren't outside of our control. They're not outside of our hands. And that because Jesus has already conquered and reigning in heaven, we have an assurance of victory. Yeah, life will be full of difficulty and it will be full of suffering, and there will be political tumult and cultural tumult that we're all going to have to experience, but we're guaranteed victory. And our primary ambition shouldn't be to make sure that some particular political power gets in the right position. Our primary ambition should be to keep ourselves spotless and pure and awaiting the coming of the Lord. I think that's what Revelation wants Christians to focus on.
The article is "Don't Get Left Behind." Why pastors should consider preaching through Revelation in our cultural moment. And the journal that you'll find it in is "Pastoring Through Political Turmoil." Author Sam Emadi. Great piece. I've been reading through Revelation in my quiet times in the last month since reading the first draft of your article. So I read the first draft of your article about a month ago, and I've turned to it in my quiet times, and it's just been a wonderful meditation, and it's been allowing me to think of our cultural moment through those lenses. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for your work, and I
Praise God.
heartily, strongly commend it to others.
Thanks, brother.